He said, "If you trust me, give me your bank password." I thought he was joking until I realized he was serious, and that one request changed everything. My name is Nora. I am 27 years old, and I live in a modest apartment in a quiet part of the city with my boyfriend Adrian, who is 32. We have been together for almost 3 years, and for a long time, our life felt simple in a way that made me believe I had finally found something stable and real, something that didn't need constant effort to survive. Every morning followed the same rhythm: the soft sound of my alarm, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen, Adrian scrolling on his phone while I prepared something small for breakfast, and those quiet moments where we didn't need to speak much to understand each other. I work as an administrative assistant in a marketing company, and my days are usually filled with emails, meetings, and small responsibilities that keep my mind busy, while Adrian works in a logistics firm where his schedule is more fixed, more predictable. I earn a little more than him, not enough to change our lifestyle, but enough that I sometimes covered extra things without thinking too much about it, because to me, relationships were about balance, not counting every detail. Outside of our relationship, I had my own small world. My best friend Lena was someone I trusted deeply, someone who always listened without judging, and my older brother Yasin was the kind of person who didn't speak much but always paid attention, always noticed things others didn't. They both liked Adrian, or at least they did in the beginning, and their approval made me feel even more secure in my choice. Lena often joked that my life sounded too calm to be real, while Yasin once told me quietly, "As long as he respects you, everything else can be fixed." And at the time, I truly believed Adrian respected me completely. But slowly, almost invisibly, things started to change. It didn't happen in one big moment. It came in small details that were easy to ignore at first. Adrian began asking more questions about my spending, not in a direct or aggressive way, but in a tone that felt slightly different, slightly sharper. If I came home with shopping bags, he would ask, "Was it expensive?" with a half smile that didn't quite feel like a joke. When I met Lena for coffee, he would casually ask how much I spent, and if I said it was nothing important, he would nod but stay quiet for a second longer than usual, like he was thinking about something he didn't say out loud. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking, that maybe he was just trying to be more involved in our shared life. One evening, something small turned into something uncomfortable. My brother Yasin called me because he needed help paying an urgent bill, and without hesitation, I transferred him the money because that's what family does. When Adrian found out later that night, his reaction wasn't loud or dramatic, which somehow made it worse. He just became quiet, his face losing his usual warmth, and he said in a calm but distant voice, "You should talk to me before making decisions like that." I was surprised because it was my personal money, my savings, and I'd never questioned how he used his. I tried to explain that it was important, that Yasin needed help, but Adrian just nodded slowly and said, "I'm just saying, if we're building a future, these things should be shared." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected because it felt like a rule I didn't agree to. A few days later, the situation became impossible to ignore. It was late at night, the kind of quiet night where everything feels still, and we were sitting on the couch with the TV playing in the background, neither of us really paying attention. Adrian suddenly muted the TV and turned to me with a serious expression that immediately made my chest feel tight. He said we needed to talk about our future, and for a brief moment I felt a small spark of happiness, thinking maybe this was something good, something I had been waiting for. But that feeling disappeared almost instantly when I saw how cold and controlled his face looked. He started talking about trust, about honesty, about how strong relationships have no secrets, and at first I agreed because it sounded normal, it sounded healthy, But then he said something that made everything inside me freeze. He told me he wanted full access to my bank account, including my login details, so he could see everything in real time. For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. I even let out a small laugh, waiting for him to smile, to say he didn't mean it seriously, but he didn't smile. He just looked at me, waiting for my answer, completely serious, completely sure of what he was asking. That's when the discomfort hit me fully, like a sudden wave I couldn't ignore. I asked him why he needed that, trying to keep my voice calm, but inside my thoughts were already racing. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and said couples who are serious don't hide money, that real adults are fully transparent with each other. And the way he said it made me feel like I was being judged, like I was somehow immature or dishonest for even questioning him. I tried to explain my side, carefully, gently, telling him that I wasn't hiding anything, that I was open to talking about money, planning together, even creating a joint account for shared expenses, but I didn't feel comfortable giving away my personal access, because to me, trust didn't mean losing all boundaries. But he didn't accept any of that. He kept repeating the same idea in different ways, saying that if I had nothing to hide, there should be no problem. And every time he said it, it felt like a quiet accusation, like he didn't really believe me. The conversation didn't turn into a loud argument, but it became heavy, suffocating, filled with long pauses and sharp words that stayed in the air after we stopped speaking. Later that night, I went to the bedroom feeling emotionally exhausted, but instead of sleeping, I just lay there staring at the ceiling while Adrian turned his back to me without saying goodnight, something he had never done before. The silence between us felt different, not peaceful like before, but cold and distant, like there was suddenly a space that I didn't know how to cross. I picked up my phone and texted Lena, trying to explain everything, and her reply came quickly. "Nora, that's not normal. Be careful." Her words made my stomach tighten, but at the same time, part of me still wanted to believe Adrian wasn't trying to control me, that maybe he was just afraid of something I didn't understand. The next morning, everything felt off. The kitchen felt colder, the air heavier, and even the simple act of making coffee felt different, like I was pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Adrian barely spoke, giving short answers, avoiding eye contact, and that quiet distance hurt more than any argument could have. Later that day at work, I couldn't focus on anything. I read the same emails again and again, made small mistakes, and kept replaying the conversation in my mind, questioning myself over and over. Was I being too private? Was I wrong to say no? Was this what real relationships required? But then, in the middle of all those questions, one thought came back stronger than the others. Why do I feel scared if I did nothing wrong? That question stayed with me, heavy and clear, and for the first time, I started to realize that this situation was not just about money, and not even just about trust. It was about something deeper, something that didn't feel right at all. The days that followed did not explode into a big fight, but instead stretched into something slower and heavier, like a quiet storm that never really leaves. And that was what made it more exhausting than anything else. Adrian did not shout, he did not insult me directly, but his behavior changed in a way that made me feel constantly watched, even when he said nothing at all. The warmth that once filled our apartment slowly disappeared, replaced by a cold, tense silence that followed us from room to room, from morning to night. Simple moments that used to feel easy, like eating breakfast together or sitting on the couch, now felt uncomfortable, like I had to think before every word, every movement, every small decision. At first, I tried to fix things, I really did. I told myself that relationships need effort, that maybe he was just stressed, maybe something at work was bothering him. So I tried to talk to him again, calmly, carefully, choosing my words like they could break if I wasn't gentle enough. I suggested we sit down and write our expenses together, or even talk to a financial advisor so we could build a plan that felt safe for both of us. But every idea I offered was rejected, not loudly, but with a quiet refusal that felt final. "It's not the same," he would say, or "you're avoiding the real issue." And slowly, it became clear that there was only one solution he would accept, the one I had already refused. Then the small comments started again, but this time they were sharper, more direct, impossible to ignore. One evening, I came home with groceries, including a few snacks I rarely bought for myself, and Adrian looked at the bag and said, "Must be nice to spend without thinking." His tone was calm, almost casual, but his eyes told a different story. I froze for a moment, not knowing how to respond, because I didn't understand why something so small had become something he could use against me. Another time, I was texting Lena and smiling at something she said, and Adrian looked at me and asked, "Who's making you smile like that?" I laughed nervously and said it was just Lena, but he didn't smile back. He just nodded slowly, like he didn't fully believe me, and that small moment stayed with me longer than it should have. A few days later, things became even more uncomfortable when Adrian suggested installing a budgeting app that could connect both of our accounts in one place. He presented it as a compromise, something modern, something practical, but I immediately understood that it was just another way to reach the same goal. When I refused again, calmly but firmly, I saw something change in his expression, something darker, something closer to frustration and anger. "You say no to everything," he said, his voice louder than before, and that sudden shift made my heart jump. I tried to remind him that I had offered other solutions, that I wasn't refusing to cooperate, but he didn't seem to hear me anymore. It was like we were having two completely different conversations. That night, I called my brother Yassine. I didn't tell him everything at first, just small parts, but he listened carefully, as he always did, and after a long silence, he said something that stayed in my mind. "Nora, trust doesn't ask for proof every day." His words were simple, but they felt heavy, real, and for the first time, I started to see the situation from the outside, not just from inside my confusion. Later, Lena sent me a long message telling me that what I was describing sounded like emotional pressure, like someone slowly trying to make me doubt myself so I would give in just to keep the peace. And even though part of me didn't want to believe that, I couldn't ignore how accurate it felt. At home, the atmosphere kept getting worse. Adrian became quieter, but his silence was no longer neutral. It felt intentional, like a punishment. He stopped doing small things he used to do, like making coffee for both of us in the morning or asking me about my day. Instead, he would sit with his phone, barely speaking, and when he did speak, his words were short, distant, sometimes slightly sarcastic. One night, while we were eating dinner in silence, he suddenly said, "It must be nice to have a private life." And even though his voice was calm, the words hit me like a sharp sting. I tried to defend myself, telling him that privacy didn't mean secrecy, but he just shrugged, like my explanation didn't matter. The worst part was how it started to affect me internally. I began to question myself in ways I never had before. I would look at my own actions and wonder if they were wrong, if I was being too distant, too independent, too something. Even simple decisions like buying a coffee or helping a friend suddenly felt heavy, like they needed justification. One evening, I sat alone in the bedroom, holding my phone, staring at my bank app, scrolling through my transactions as if I was trying to prove something to him or maybe to myself. Everything looked normal, everything made sense, and yet I felt anxious, like I was doing something wrong just by having control over my own life. For a moment, I even considered giving him what he wanted, not because I agreed with him, but because I was tired. Tired of the tension, tired of the silence, tired of feeling like I was constantly being tested. I imagined handing him my password, imagined the relief of ending the conflict, imagined things going back to how they used to be. But then another image came into my mind, him checking every transaction, asking questions, watching every move, and my chest tightened again. That didn't feel like peace. That felt like losing something important, something I couldn't get back once it was gone. So I said no again, this time not just to him, but to that fear inside me that was trying to convince me to give up my boundaries just to keep the relationship. And even though I didn't say it out loud yet, deep inside, I started to understand something clearly. This was no longer just a disagreement. This was a turning point. The moment I understood that everything had already changed did not come with a loud argument or a dramatic scene, but with a quiet, almost invisible clarity that settled inside me one early morning, when the apartment was still and the sunlight was just beginning to enter through the window, soft and calm, as if nothing in the world was wrong. Adrian was still asleep, lying on his side, facing away from me like he had done almost every night that week. And I stood there for a long moment, just looking at him, trying to recognize the man I had loved for nearly 3 years, trying to find that same warmth, that same safety I used to feel so naturally. But all I felt now was distance, not physical distance, but something deeper, something emotional that I didn't know how to fix anymore. I didn't feel anger in that moment, and I didn't feel hate either. I just felt a quiet sadness, the kind that comes when you realize that something meaningful is slipping away, not because of one big mistake, but because of many small moments that slowly changed everything. That morning, I made tea instead of coffee, not because I preferred it, but because I needed something slower, something calmer, something that could match the way my thoughts were finally settling after days of confusion. I sat at the table alone, holding the warm cup in my hands, and for the first time since all of this started, my mind felt clear, not full of questions, not full of doubt, just clear. I stopped asking myself if I was wrong. I stopped trying to justify my feelings. I stopped trying to find the perfect words to fix everything. Instead, I asked myself one simple question: can I live like this? And the answer came immediately, quietly, but with certainty: no. When Adrian finally woke up and walked into the kitchen, he looked tired, like he hadn't slept well either. And for a brief second, I saw something human in his eyes again, something that reminded me of who he used to be. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by that same guarded expression I had seen too many times in the past few days. He greeted me softly, and I responded calmly, and for a moment it almost felt normal. But I knew it wasn't, and I didn't want to pretend anymore. I asked him to sit down, and this time my voice didn't shake, my hands didn't feel cold, and my heart, even though it was beating fast, felt steady in a way I hadn't felt before. I told him everything. Not in a rushed or emotional way, but slowly, clearly, choosing my words with honesty instead of fear. I told him how his request made me feel, not just uncomfortable, but unsafe in my own space. I told him how the silence, the comments, the pressure had affected me, how it made me question myself, how it made me feel like I had to prove my innocence in a relationship where trust should have been given freely. I reminded him that I had offered solutions, that I had tried to meet him halfway, but that what he was asking for was not compromise. It was control, even if he didn't see it that way. He tried to interrupt a few times, but I gently asked him to let me finish, and for once, he listened. When I was done, the room became very quiet. He looked at me for a long time, searching my face as if he was trying to find something he had lost. And then he said, almost defensively, that he was just trying to protect our future, that he didn't want surprises, that he had seen relationships fail because of hidden problems. And for the first time, I understood something important, not to excuse his behavior, but to see it more clearly. This wasn't just about me. This was about his fear, his need for certainty, his inability to trust without proof. But understanding him didn't mean accepting what he was doing. So I took a deep breath and said the words that had been growing inside me for days, words that felt heavy but also necessary. "I can't give you what you're asking for," I said softly, "and I won't." He went quiet again, and I could see the frustration building in his eyes, the same frustration that had been there every time I refused before. But this time, I didn't feel scared of it. I just watched him, calmly, waiting. Then he asked me the question that had been hanging between us from the beginning. "So what does that mean for us?" And for a brief moment, I felt the weight of everything we had shared, all the memories, all the small moments that once made me feel happy, all the plans we had talked about. And it would have been so easy, so tempting to ignore everything, to say something softer, something that would delay the end just a little longer. But I didn't. I said, "We want different things," I said softly. "You want control to feel safe. I need trust to feel safe. And those two things, they don't live in the same place." The silence that followed felt different from all the others. It wasn't heavy or confusing. It was clear, final. He stood up slowly, ran his hair through his hair, and looked away, and for the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me. He didn't push further. Maybe he understood. Maybe he didn't. But something inside him seemed to accept that this was not a conversation he could win. The days after that were not easy, but they were calm. We talked about practical things, who would move out, how to divide the furniture, what to do with the apartment. There were no big fights, no dramatic scenes, just a quiet sadness that stayed between us, like a reminder of what we once had and what we had lost. Lena came to help me pack some of my things, and when she hugged me, I realized how much I needed that support, how much I had been holding everything inside. Yassine checked on me every day, not asking too many questions, just making sure I was okay in his own quiet way. The day Adrian left, the apartment felt empty in a way that was almost overwhelming at first. The silence was louder than ever, the space around me too wide, too unfamiliar. I sat on the couch alone, looking at the same walls, the same furniture, the same place where everything had changed. And for a moment, I felt the sadness rise again, strong and real. But then something else came with it. Relief. Not happiness, not yet, but a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. Like I could finally breathe without thinking, without explaining, without proving anything to anyone. I stood up, walked to the window, and opened it, letting fresh air fill the room. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I felt present, truly present in my own life. That night, I made myself dinner, something simple, something small, and I sat at the table alone. But it didn't feel lonely in the same way. It felt quiet, peaceful, honest. I looked at my phone, at my bank app, at my messages, at everything that used to make me feel watched. And for the first time, I didn't feel anxious. I felt free. Days passed, and slowly life started to rebuild itself in small ways. I spent more time with Lena, laughed again without overthinking, visited Yassine more often, and focused on my work without that constant pressure in the back of my mind. I started doing small things for myself again, buying what I wanted without guilt, going out without explaining, living without feeling like I was being evaluated all the time. And one evening, as I was sitting alone with a cup of tea, I realized something that made me smile softly. I didn't lose him. I found myself. The pain didn't disappear completely, and maybe it never would, because what we had was real at some point, and real things leave marks. But those marks didn't break me. They taught me something I would never forget: that love is not supposed to feel like pressure, that trust is not something you prove every day, and that the right person will never ask you to give up your peace just to make them feel secure. So if someone ever makes you feel like you have to shrink, explain, or expose every part of yourself just to be accepted, remember this: you are not too private. You are not too difficult. You are simply asking for respect. And that is something you should never, ever have to negotiate. Because real love doesn't control you. Real love lets you breathe.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss any new videos, and share this content with your friends to support us and help us grow.